Welcome to School for Relationships. As a therapist, I'm always looking to see the biggest patterns with the clients I'm working with and then to dig into the root causes of these patterns. In particular, I'm interested in chronic stress, chronic toxic stress. And as I look at what impacts my clients' mental health, what causes us chronic stress, one of the biggest patterns I've noticed and been researching is codependency. What is codependency? Right off the bat, I'll just say there is not a great definition out there. Codependency started off as a more niche concept associated with the way that loved ones of someone suffering from alcohol or substance abuse can overhelp and enable their loved one's addiction. In mental health literature in general, codependency is still somewhat obscure and undefined. And then in self-help spaces on social media, we've got so many different meanings floating around for codependency that sometimes it feels almost meaningless. So a big part of why we're here today is to give codependency a definition that is simple, specific, and relatable, even outside of addiction. Before we define codependency, though, let's talk about why codependency matters. Why should you care? One of the most fundamental human needs is to love and be loved, to give and to receive. And this type of mutual love and support is something that I think we are all worthy of and that is possible for everyone. But we're not always taught what mutuality in a relationship looks and feels like, or to expect that this is realistic. So instead, we're going to look at how many of us are taught to show up in our relationships, which is codependency. And with codependency, we are looking at relationships that over time make us feel either drained and resentful or overwhelmed and suffocated. And these feelings are coming up because we aren't getting our core needs met in the relationship. And if we're going for long periods of time without our core needs being met, we're looking at some of the most common physical and mental health symptoms that can happen. Beyond symptoms, we're also experiencing sometimes deep feelings of loneliness, even within our relationships. And in the worst case scenario, codependency can lead to or perpetuate abuse and exploitation. So, we're here to talk about a new way of relating with other people and really just to give ourselves a sense of choice for how we show up in our relationships. And we're starting to pay attention to what feels good for me in relationships. We have, each of us, many ways of giving back to others that also give to us. And then there's going to be other aspects of relationships that are more naturally draining. So we want to see, how do I show up more in the ways that give back to me and pull back from some of the ways that feel more draining so I can stay and engage in a relationship in a more sustainable way. And as we're paying attention to what feels good for us in relationships, we're also getting this incredible opportunity to get to know ourselves better. And by following what feels good for us, we're reinforcing over time that we're worthy of feeling good and can not only heal codependent relationships, but heal and build unconditional self-worth. So hopefully I've sold you. Let's get into it. Let's talk about what is codependency. The simplest definition I have is that codependency is a relationship where one person or group is over-assuming responsibility and the other person or group is under-assuming responsibility in the relationship. You will hear me call over-assuming responsibility, overfunctioning, overdoing, overgiving, and under-assuming responsibility, under-functioning, underdoing, undergiving. This can happen in many types of relationships. Our brains may automatically go to romantic relationships for a lot of people. But sure, yeah, codependency can happen within a romantic relationship, also with our friends, with our family, even in relationships with people we don't know as well, like at work. And within each of these different types of relationship, as you can see, there are many different types of responsibilities. There's some physical tasks like cooking, cleaning, anything that's attending to our basic comfort and safety. And then we have less physical forms of support that can include managing logistics and planning, managing finances. We could be talking about maintaining positive and effective communication in relationships, and many different kinds of emotional labor and emotional regulation. So when we're building awareness to see, am I in a codependent relationship? What we're not looking for is a relationship to be totally equal, where it's like, I give this and you give exactly that same thing. We're looking for building relationships that we have a sense for both parties of reciprocity. It's a give and a take. And we're trying to maintain this mutual sense of reciprocity over time. So relationships and people are going to go through phases. There's going to be times where we have more or less to give, ups and downs. That is very normal. What we want to kind of track is, over a period of a few weeks, how are we feeling within that relationship? Are we feeling that sense of mutuality? And again, in every different kind of relationship, we're going to have responsibilities split up in different ways. We're not looking for that equality, but we're looking for kind of, based on the type of relationship, different people showing up in ways that match their strengths, their interests, their capacity. And when we have this reciprocity, we've got a whole different kind of feeling in our relationships. Without that, we're again at this place where we're looking at the overfunctioning person feeling more drained and over time resentful, and the underfunctioning person feeling overwhelmed and more avoidant. Some important exceptions when we're talking about codependency. This content is focused primarily on a relationship between two able adults. Exception 1, if we have a relationship between able adult and an adult with a physical or mental disability, responsibility is just going to be divided up in different ways. There is a level of dependence and support that one person needs, and we want to honor and respect that, generally while still giving as much responsibility to both parties as possible in the relationship, because that's going to feel more fulfilling and rewarding for both people most of the time. Our second exception is looking at relationships between an adult and a child. I do not think that children can or should be labeled as codependent. Children are dependent, period. It is a natural and very healthy part of a child's development to go through different phases of dependency as they're going through their different developmental stages, and we want to honor and protect that. So while a child may be in a relationship with a codependent adult, and they may be taught to engage in relationships in codependent ways, children can't be codependent. So coming back to our relationship between two able adults, codependency is a dance that takes two to tango. Both people are just as involved in creating codependency within a relationship a lot of the time. And for both parties, we'll go into this more, but I think the root of codependency is low self-worth and a fear of intimacy in relationships. Let's start though with diving a little bit into under-assuming responsibility in relationships first. What does that look like? So for someone who's underassuming responsibility, this is oftentimes someone who struggles to consistently take care of their own needs. They may be engaging in behavior that inflicts some level of harm on themselves. And we could be talking about the big ones like substance abuse, physical self-harm, disordered eating. And there's other examples too. We could be looking at, constant self-criticism in our own heads. We could be looking at self-isolating and not reaching out to or responding to the people who help us and make us feel good. We might be looking at someone who struggles with basic hygiene and keeping their spaces clean enough to be able to use them and feel good in them. Maybe we're looking at compulsive spending beyond someone's means. With these examples, hopefully you can see there's some more directly harmful actions we can take towards ourselves, but inaction can be just as harmful. And this is where we're looking at self-neglect and sometimes a form and a level of passivity where we're not stepping up to do the things in our lives that give our lives meaning, give us a sense that life is worth it. We might not be engaging with the people who make life feel worth it for us, or showing up, like let's say at work or school, with the care that we need to keep our jobs and be able to financially take care of ourselves. So with someone struggling with this, let's bring in that codependent relationship. Sometimes the codependent relationship can serve as a band-aid for the pain that person's in, even the pain of their own low self-worth. And on some level, they may derive some confidence from being in this relationship. This is, I would say typically on a more surface level, but there might be this part of that person that thinks, I see this other person who's giving so much to me and even overextending themselves for me. I must be worth something for them to do so much for me. So we can have some confidence, but on another deeper level, I often think that codependent relationships can cause that person to judge and criticize themselves even more for not giving as much, for potentially using other people, and this can deepen our dislike or even hatred for ourselves. The last big thing to mention is when we have someone coming in and doing things for us and assuming responsibility for us, we don't have to face the natural consequences of our behavior. So we have less opportunities to learn from how we're behaving and less motivation to change. One example of this, just to make it more concrete, is let's take a person who struggles to pay their bills on time. If they're in a codependent relationship and someone is coming in and reminding them every month to pay their bills, or even saying, hey, let's sit down, let's do this, let's pay your bills now, maybe that person is coming in and just automatically paying their bills for them. That person has no opportunity and no motivation to really try to figure out, how do I remember to do this? What kind of systems can I build to try to make this easier for myself? They've got someone else taking care of it. And so, this is an example where if one person is paying the bills and then the other person's doing other things, we can have reciprocity. But if we've got one person that's really coming in and pulling all the weight of logistics in that relationship, that's where we're looking at more one-sided help that can start to feel really draining. So going into that more, let's talk about over-assuming responsibility in relationships. This can happen at a whole spectrum of levels of functioning. Overfunctioning can really over time bring us down and cause significant impacts on our own lives and our own abilities to function. We also see what psychotherapist Terry Cole coins as a high-functioning codependence. These might be people who would be the last person to think of themselves as codependent because they take a lot of pride in their self-sufficiency. These might be people who are very put together, successful, have a lot of things going for them, many gifts. Oftentimes we might see this go into perfectionism, someone who might struggle to delegate to others and worry about, others not being able to do something as well, which, hey, sometimes that can be true. But the cost of this kind of high functioning codependency is the same as with the person underassuming responsibility, in that person's needs, the high functioning codependent person, typically are being deprioritized and oftentimes dismissed. They might really struggle to receive from others. And we all have different needs from relationships, for amount of time with others, how deep we want to go, but we each share as humans a fundamental need for connection. Our brains, bodies, and nervous systems are built to survive and thrive on collaborative connection that nurtures us, that regulates us, that grounds us. So what I'm trying to say here is no one person is an island or meant to feel like an island and do everything on their own. And so as we see, we've got both the over and under functioning person neglecting their own needs in different ways. And again, over time, this can lead to depression, anxiety, and what it feels like is being in a relationship where your sense of self is erased. It's like, I'm doing so much and I'm giving so much, but where am I in this relationship? Where are my feelings and needs? And this can be really painful and disturbing, but it can also become addicting because that relationship can be a way to dissociate and numb and escape ourselves. And codependent relationships can give the high-functioning codependent person this sense of not needing as much as others, which is very often a way they may be ignoring their needs. Codependent relationships can allow them to dismiss their needs, to try to rewrite and repackage their needs so that their needs feel more convenient and acceptable and manageable. And so we've got this questioning of our own needs going on in this process, which we may have been taught to do. We may have been taught to believe that our own needs and our own boundaries are selfish. And sometimes I hear people putting like unconditional love on a pedestal of, if there's something wrong in a relationship, our first reflex is, what did I not do? What did I not give enough of? How can I do more? And we may look at our love and say, is my love not big enough, not generous enough? But what happened in that relationship to our love and care for ourselves? So I want to take that one step deeper and talk about empathy. And let's just separate out empathy and compassion. So empathy is when we take someone else's feelings into our own bodies and we're feeling their feelings as if they were our own. We're losing touch with our own emotions and even physical sensations. Whereas with compassion, we can really see and connect with someone else's emotions, but we're still rooted in ourselves and our own experiences, emotions, physical sensations. So it's feeling with someone instead of for someone. And there's a big difference. Even some of the latest research shows us that empathy activates pain circuitry in our brains, whereas compassion activates more pleasure circuitry. It feels good for us. It's meeting that need for, real connection with others. And I think this kind of empathy, like absorbing other people's feelings into ourselves, most often comes from enmeshment. Let's say growing up in an enmeshed family. And enmeshment is where we have blurry or non-existent boundaries. And let's talk about especially emotional boundaries. Again, we have these boundaries that are undefined. And so we might take in and absorb a lot of the feelings of people around us. And when this happens, a lot of the times we want to avoid causing other people pain. That takes us right into people-pleasing behaviors. And even more than that, we might want to avoid the people we love having to feel pain at all. We might be trying to prevent them from suffering at all. And, sometimes for the overfunctioning person, this can feel somewhat simple. I've heard so many times this sense of, if only the other person would just X, Y, and Z. We have like these simple steps of if only the other person would do this, then they would have less pain, they would be living up to their potential. And, this advice can be well-intentioned, but rule of thumb, if we are repeating more than one time to someone what we think they should be doing, we are in the space of trying to control them. So again, if you're giving unsolicited advice more than one time to someone, there's probably an attempt to control them or change them, even change their feelings in that moment. What's wrong with this? When we try to prevent someone else from feeling pain, we're right back to shielding them from living and experiencing the natural consequences of their behavior. And without those consequences, people lose the motivation to learn and change and grow. And finally, allowing other people to carry and feel what is theirs is a way we can respect other people's autonomy by allowing other people to have their own emotional experience. So let's take overfunctioning, underfunctioning. We've got both of these people. Let's talk about this dance that happens when they come together. We have, on some level, both people are aware there's this imbalance in the relationship. One person is feeling drained and strained and resentful, and the other person is feeling overwhelmed, suffocated, sometimes trapped. If the overfunctioning person has been giving and doing so much in their relationships for so long, this creates this feeling of the other person owing us something, at the very least, to stay in the relationship. So we can see that overfunctioning can be a way to avoid abandonment in our relationships. And then with underfunctioning, oftentimes they're trying to avoid engulfment, which is this feeling of intimacy kind of taking over us and suffocating us. This happens when we're in intimate relationships where we don't have the space for our own needs and feelings. And so that person may be feeling more avoidant because they're trying to preserve themselves and keep some space for their own autonomy. And so we have this fear of abandonment and this fear of engulfment, which are really two sides to the same coin, and that coin is fear of intimacy. Intimacy is, one of life's most beautiful and enriching experiences. We all long for it on some level. But hey, intimacy is also where we get the most burned, where we experience the most heartache and loss. And so for a lot of people, we have this fear that can develop of intimacy. Intimacy might feel unreliable, unstable, or distant. We might be afraid of that abandonment. And that sometimes can make us more anxious and want to cling on to intimacy more. And then we have intimacy that can feel engulfing, like it took over us and our space without leaving us some room for kind of our differences, individual differences. And, if someone is feeling kind of trapped or taken over by their relationships, they're going to respond with more avoidance. And so when we've got these two people kind of going in deeper and responding to these triggers and these fears with learned codependent responses, you might have an overfunctioner coming in and trying even harder. They may sense the relationship is precarious and they may give more, extend themselves more, and they're pushing themselves, but really pushing the other person to stay and to reciprocate in the relationship. They might consciously or unconsciously be giving so much to make the other person feel guilty or indebted. And sometimes they may also give in a way that can cause the other person to lose confidence in their ability to stand on their own 2 feet and to not need this other person. So this can work as a strategy for periods of time, but over time, usually the overfunctioning person burns themselves out. And then they may give up and not want anything to do with intimacy at all. That can bring in that profound experience of being alone of not being able to rely on anyone, of other people just taking from us and never giving. So we've got this hot and cold, same for the underfunctioning person. Sometimes they may step up and they may, out of obligation or a desire to avoid conflict, they may do more, may give more. This is usually not going to be sustainable if it's coming from a pressured place or a place of obligation. And we also see, then the opposite is the cold of that person may want to avoid the relationship more, and that fear of engulfment may be triggered. They want more space and they're more avoidant. And with both of these fears, fear of abandonment, fear of engulfment, we can alternate between these. We can alternate between over and under functioning even in the same relationship. And we have to remember that this way of relating to others is learned. And because it's a learned way of relating to other people, we can unlearn it and we can learn new ways of showing up in and approaching our relationships. So, hey, even in codependent relationships, neither side is wrong or bad or more to blame. Codependency itself isn't all bad. Sometimes it's necessary in some relationships or for some periods of time. And long term, I think it comes with a pretty hefty price tag. So I say all this just to say, we're not here to judge. I am here to provide a new perspective and new information. Please take or leave what feels useful for you. And I hope really that this can actually feel kind of liberating, because we can start to see that there are other ways we can relate to others that build more inner and outer security, inner confidence, inner self-worth, and outer security, like more secure and stable relationships with others. I'll be talking about that a lot more in the next video, how to heal from codependency. Before then, please share any thoughts, questions, concerns, like did I miss anything out from your own experience of this? I'd love to hear from you. And thank you for tuning in to School for Relationships. If you can, please subscribe to this channel so I can keep bringing you more of this kind of content.